You know, the classic fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm? Most people, I think, imagine them as these quaint stories read to children. Maybe a bit charming, definitely innocent.
Right, that's the common picture.
But did you know the original version of Cinderella, for instance, had the stepsisters mutilating their own feet and then having their eyes pecked out by doves?
It's pretty stark compared to what we usually hear.
Or that the first Rapunzel explicitly mentioned her pregnancy. It's quite a difference.
A world of difference, yeah.
Welcome to Seeking History, where we try to go beyond the familiar surface to uncover some of the fascinating, often hidden stories behind these big cultural touchstones. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the incredible transformation of the Brothers Grimm's Kinder- und Hausmärchen, their children's and household tales.
Hmm.
Looking at how they went from being this serious 19th century German scholarly work to the globally recognized children's stories we know today.
It's a journey that really tells us a lot.
Yeah. It seems steeped in history, linguistics, nationalism, changing social values. It's much more than just simple fairy tales.
It truly is a remarkable story, and one that offers, I think, profound insights into the eras these tales move through and maybe how our own understanding of them has shifted. What's so fascinating here is that the popular perception, simple children's entertainment, it completely obscures their complex origins.
And their original purpose.
Exactly, their original, deeply serious, scholarly purpose. We're going to unpack how these formidable German scholars, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, actually set out to do something far more profound than just entertain.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our story begins not really in a whimsical forest, but more in the lecture halls of the University of Marburg and on the pretty turbulent political stage of Napoleonic Europe. Tell us about the world that shaped Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm.
Well, the early 19th century in the German-speaking lands was a period of immense upheaval. You have to remember, Germany wasn't a unified nation yet.
You're right, it was fragmented.
Very fragmented. A collection of states, many of them under French occupation during the Napoleonic Wars. And this political crisis was felt really acutely as a cultural threat.
A threat to German identity.
Precisely. Risking the loss of a distinct German identity under the weight of French influence, French culture. It was a time when many intellectuals felt this urgent need to define and, I guess, preserve what it meant to be German.
So how did this backdrop, this French occupation and fragmented Germany, how did that influence the surge of German nationalism? And what role did the Grimms find themselves playing in that?
Well, this political instability definitely fueled a powerful surge of German nationalism. There was this urgent search for something to unite these disparate states, something cultural, something that transcended the political borders.
And the Grimms were part of that search?
A central part, yes. They were formidable scholars themselves. Jacob, born 1785, and Wilhelm, 1786. They initially went to the University of Marburg to study law, actually. The plan was to become civil servants.
Oh, interesting. So not folklore from the start.
Not at all.
Mm.
But their path shifted significantly there. A key figure was Friedrich Karl von Savigny, a renowned law professor. He taught them rigorous antiquarian investigation.
What did that involve?
It wasn't just digging up old facts. It meant meticulously studying historical documents, traditions, understanding how social institutions and cultural heritage sort of naturally grew and changed over time. Almost like observing a living thing evolve.
Okay.
And this approach became absolutely fundamental to all their later work.
And then there was the influence of the poet Clemens Brentano, right? That seems like another pivotal connection for them.
Yes, Brentano was a leading figure in German Romanticism, and he really ignited their passion for folk poetry, for oral traditions. And this was crucial. It was a fusion of that rigorous historical methodology they learned from Savigny.
Right, the scholarly side.
With a deep appreciation for authentic cultural expression found outside formal, written literature. So their decision to collect folktales wasn't just a quaint hobby.
No, it sounds much more serious.
It was a deliberate, deeply patriotic, and scholarly act. They genuinely believed the authentic essence of the German nation, its Volksgeist. The spirit of the people could be found and preserved in these oral traditions.
So safeguarding a pure German voice against foreign influence.
Yeah.
Building identity.
Exactly. That was the core motivation.
So their romanticism wasn't about just fantasy and escapism, but it was more like a scholarly lens they used for this nationalistic project of cultural preservation.
Precisely. And this scholarly nationalistic purpose directly informed how they approached collecting the tales. which, as you hinted earlier, isn't quite the romantic image most people have.
Yeah, it's fascinating how those images stick. The popular idea of the Grimms wandering from village to village, listening to humble peasants tell stories by the fire. It's very ingrained.
It is.
But is that really how it happened? How did they actually collect these tales, and what was their main academic goal?
Well, their work really has to be understood as part of their larger, quite revolutionary contributions to historical linguistics and Germanic philology.
Philology. That's the study of language in historical context, through texts.
Exactly. The Grimms were among the most important German scholars of their time, and their primary contributions were really in the scientific study of language. Jacob Grimm's multi-volume Deutsche Grammatik, the German grammar, published between 1819 and 1837. That was a foundational text.
Okay.
And within it, he articulated what became known as Grimm's Law.
Yeah.
This was a groundbreaking linguistic principle describing systematic, predictable sound shifts in Germanic languages over time, like how certain consonants changed from Proto-Indo-European to Germanic.
So for them, the folktales were essentially linguistic data. Is that fair to say? What were they looking for in the stories?
Precisely. That's a very good way to put it. The stories, often told in regional dialects, preserving archaic vocabulary, old grammar. They provided the raw material. Raw material to trace the German language's historical development and its various forms across regions and time. This was invaluable for their work. Even their massive Deutsches Wörterbuch, the German dictionary, a project so huge it wasn't finished until a century after they died. It shows their core focus was comprehensive documentation of the German language.
So the tales were a means to that bigger philological end.
Yes, a rich source for understanding the evolution of German. Absolutely.
And who were the actual informants then, if not the wandering peasant folk?
Right, that's the other key piece. The Grimms relied on a cultivated network of informants, people who would visit them in their home in Kassel to tell them stories, which the brothers would then meticulously write down.
So people came to them?
Mostly, yes. And significantly, their most important sources weren't illiterate peasants. They were educated, literate, middle-class women. Yes. Key figures included Dorothea Wieman, a tailor's wife from a nearby village, who apparently had an incredible memory for these tales. But also friends from their own bourgeois social circle, like the Hasenpflug family and the Weil family Wilhelm, actually married Dorothea Wilde.
Wow.
And crucially, many of these informants even had French Huguenot ancestry. Their backgrounds weren't exclusively German, which adds another layer.
That is significant.
It means these women acted as intermediaries. They were filtering the tales through their own educated sensibilities before they even reached the Grimms. So the collection was a product of a very specific social and intellectual environment, not just pure peasant folklore plucked from the fields.
That distinction really changes things. It means the collected tales weren't this sort of direct, unadulterated transmission from the common people.
Not directly, no.
And the first editions of the Kinder- and Hausmärchen, they clearly reflected this scholarly intent, right?
Absolutely. The two volumes, published in 1812 and 1815, were unequivocally academic works. They were intended for scholars, for their peers.
How so? What did they look like?
Well, they were laden with scholarly stuff.
Yeah?
Extensive prefaces, really detailed academic notes. The 1812 edition, for example, had a huge appendix, like 60 pages, comparing tales to international variants, discussing origins.
Wow.
They often provided multiple versions or fragments of a single story. The content itself was raw, unpolished, it preserved dialects, and even included some pretty bizarre or gruesome fragments, like one called How Children Played at Slaughtering.
Goodness. Not exactly bedtime reading?
Definitely not. And crucially, these first editions were not illustrated. The focus was purely on the words as cultural and linguistic data.
So thinking about those original versions, what really stands out to you? Because they sound like a world away from what many of us grew up with.
Well, they're characterized by this pre-Victorian candor, a frankness regarding violence, sexuality, family conflict, things that later got smoothed over.
Was this darkness just for shock value?
I don't think it was gratuitous, no. It reflected the harsh realities the era the stories came from, and it served a clear didactic purpose. These were offering stark, cautionary lessons often aimed at adults or young adults about the consequences of actions in a world that could be very unforgiving.
Let's maybe dive into some specific examples because they sound genuinely surprising to modern ears.
Okay, let's take Cinderella. In the Grimm's 1812 version, the wicked stepsisters literally mutilate themselves to try and fit the slipper.
How so?
One cuts off her toe, the other cuts off a piece of her heel. And their deception is revealed by the blood pouring from the shoe.
Ouch. Ouch.
And their final punishment. At Cinderella's wedding, doves sent by her dead mother actually swoop down and peck out their eyes, leaving them blind for life.
That's intense retribution.
Very vivid. And Snow White had equally stark elements, didn't it?
Yes, indeed. The evil queen isn't just defeated. She's forced to put on a pair of red-hot iron shoes. Red-hot iron shoes.
Yes, and dance in them until she drops dead. Or think about the Goose Maid. There's a treacherous lady-in-waiting who impersonates the princess. Her punishment: stripped naked, put inside a barrel studded with sharp nails,
Oh my goodness.
and then dragged through the streets by 2 white horses until she's dead. These graphic punishments, they really underscored a worldview where evil met brutal, swift, and often very public retribution.
The sexual elements you mentioned are also quite striking, especially thinking about what was later removed.
Yeah, the most famous example is probably Rapunzel. In that 1812 edition, her secret meetings with the prince are revealed completely innocently. She asks Mother Gothel.
What does she ask?
She says, "Tell me, Mother Gothel, why are my clothes becoming too tight? They don't fit me anymore."
Ah, an unmistakable reference to her pregnancy.
Absolutely. A detail that was systematically erased from all the later editions. It really highlights a very different understanding of innocence and what was considered appropriate content back then.
And you mentioned the villain wasn't always who we think. That seems like a profound psychological shift.
It is perhaps the most startling difference, I think. In those 1812 versions of Hansel and Gretel and Snow White, the antagonist wasn't a stepmother. It was the protagonist's own biological mother.
Their own mother.
Yes. In Hansel and Gretel, the mother, facing famine, cold, tells the father they have to abandon the children in the woods so that the 2 of them might survive.
Chilling.
And in Snow White, it's her own mother, driven by jealous vanity over her 7-year-old daughter's beauty, who orders a huntsman to kill the girl and bring back her liver and lungs for her to eat.
Liver and lungs. Good grief. That changes the source of horror entirely, doesn't it? From maternal abandonment.
To the more conventional, maybe slightly less disturbing step-family rivalry later on, it really speaks to some incredibly primal anxieties.
So, okay, we have these raw, academic, sometimes brutal first editions. How did they transform into the beloved children's stories we recognize? This was clearly a very deliberate process, wasn't it? Driven mostly by Wilhelm Grimm.
It absolutely was a deliberate transformation, yes. You see, the first editions were criticized. People found them tasteless, unsuitable for children, partly because of the raw content, partly the intrusive scholarly notes.
And they didn't sell well.
No, they weren't a commercial success initially. And this coincided with the rise of the Biedermeier period in Germany.
What was the Biedermeier period about?
It emphasized domesticity, piety, family values, order, and a much more sentimental view of childhood. Childhood innocence became paramount. So to reach the growing middle-class market, the tales really had to align with these emerging social values.
So Wilhelm, who had the more literary sensibility, took the lead, revising them over subsequent editions.
That's right. He oversaw systematic revisions across 6 subsequent editions, from 1819 right up to the final edition in 1857. Jacob, the more rigid philologist, the linguist, he reportedly disapproved of many of these changes. He felt they compromised the authenticity.
Wilhelm's editing sounds quite ideological then. Systematic.
It really was. He meticulously sanitized the tales. Sexual references like Rapunzel's pregnancy were removed. Other risque or scatological elements disappeared.
Like what?
Well, for example, an incestuous father figure found in some source tales for The Girl Without Hands was replaced by the devil. That effectively distances the transgression from the core family unit.
I see.
He infused them with Christian morality, too.
Yeah.
Added pious language, references to God, angels, Christian virtues. He also kind of bourgeoisified them.
How so?
Heroines became more passive, more modest. Clear moral imperatives were added, like that famous line in Little Red Riding Hood, which wasn't in the earliest versions quite like that, about looking straight ahead and not straying from the path, reinforcing obedience, social conformity.
Right.
And he smoothed out the prose. Made it more literary, more standardized, better for reading aloud compared to the sometimes blunt style of the first edition.
It's still a fascinating paradox, though, that while the sexual content was removed, the graphic punishment of villains often stayed, or was even enhanced. What does that tell us about Biedermeier values?
That's absolutely key to understanding the era's moral calculus. Sexual content, especially unpunished premarital sex, was seen as fundamentally corrupting to childhood innocence and a direct threat to the patriarchal social order.
Okay.
But brutal punishment of evil, that powerfully reinforced the moral order. It showed the dire consequences of transgression, So a pregnant, unmarried Rapunzel was actually seen as a greater danger to a child's moral development as they understood it then.
Than a queen dancing to her death in burning shoes.
Exactly. The latter served a strong didactic purpose. Evil will inevitably meet severe, inescapable punishment. So both editorial trends, removing sex, keeping violence against villains, they were really two sides of the same coin. Both worked to uphold the conservative, patriarchal moral framework of the Biedermeier home.
And this shift towards children's literature really cemented with the Kleinausgabe, the small edition, in 1825. How did that specific edition change things?
That was the pivotal moment, absolutely. The Kleinausgabe was a curated selection of just 50 tales. It was explicitly designed, edited, and marketed for children.
And it had pictures.
Crucially, yes. It was illustrated by the Grimm's younger brother, Ludwig Emil Grimm. That gave the stories a visual appeal they'd lacked before. And this Kleinausgabe was an immense commercial success. It went through 10 editions between 1825 and 1858.
Wow, 10 editions.
It firmly established the Kinder- and Hausmärchen in the public mind as Grimm's fairy tales, a book primarily for children. This really solidified their place not as academic texts anymore, but as beloved stories for the nursery.
So the journey of these tales didn't stop with the Grimms themselves. Their legacy seems incredibly multifaceted, establishing a whole academic discipline, but also being twisted for some pretty sinister political purposes later on.
Yet, beyond the tales themselves, the Grimms' most lasting scholarly contribution was really the establishment of folklore as a serious academic discipline. Before them, studying oral traditions was mostly antiquarian, kind of unsystematic.
They brought rigor to it.
They applied those rigorous philological methods they learned to collecting and analyzing folk tales. Their meticulous transcription, their comparative notes, their systematic approach to classifying tale types and motifs. It provided a scientific framework for the field.
So the Kinder- and Hausmärchen became a model.
Yes, especially with all its scholarly notes, it became the foundational model for folklore collection around the world. It was really the first truly scientific compilation of its kind.
But for many people today, especially in the last century, the way they first encountered these stories was through, well, Disney.
Oh, without a doubt. The Walt Disney Company, starting way back with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937.
Right, the first feature-length animated film.
Then Cinderella in 1950, Sleeping Beauty in 1959. They adapted the later, already sanitized versions of the tales, often drawing from other European variants too, like those by Charles Perrault.
And Disney changed them further.
Oh yes. Disney further removed violence, simplified complex themes into very clear good versus evil dichotomies, and really infused them with mid-20th century American values. Optimism, romantic love, conquering all, the promise of a happily ever after.
So for millions, the Disney princess basically replaced her literary ancestor.
Effectively, yes, creating a new, incredibly popular canon.
It's also really crucial, though, to acknowledge a much darker chapter in their legacy, the co-option by the Third Reich. That's a chilling example of how cultural items can be manipulated.
It's a truly tragic distortion of their work and intent. During the 1930s and 40s, the Nazi Party actively appropriated the Kinder- and Hausmärchen.
How did they use them?
They promoted them as embodying pure, quote-unquote, Aryan folk virtues. The tales were stripped of their universal human themes and deliberately interpreted through a virulent racist ideology.
Can you give an example?
Well, Nazi propagandists claimed Little Red Riding Hood was an allegory for the innocent German people being preyed upon by the Jewish wolf. Cinderella was interpreted as a story about racial purity and the importance of traditional German family roles.
That's horrifying.
It really demonstrates how even works aimed at cultural preservation can be tragically twisted and manipulated to serve hateful political agendas. It's a stark warning.
So what does all this complex history mean for the tales today? How should we engage with them now?
Well, the legacy remains incredibly dynamic. It's not static. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, we've seen a whole new wave of adaptations in literature, film, TV, often reacting directly against the sanitized Disney versions.
Trying to reclaim the darkness.
Exactly. Authors like Philip Pullman, Angela Carter, TV shows like Grimm or Once Upon a Time. They explicitly delve back into the darker, more complex, more psychologically rich themes found in the Grimm's original 1812 and 1815 editions.
So the tales are resilient.
Remarkably so. They prove not to be static texts, but living stories, constantly being re-examined, reimagined by each generation.
So The journey of the Kinder- und Hausmärchen is truly remarkable then. From this serious, nationalistic, scholarly project born in Napoleonic Europe, it became this global cultural touchstone, but not without some massive transformations along the way.
Absolutely. The Grimms created an academic archive, really laying the foundation for modern folklore studies and historical linguistics.
Yeah.
That was their primary goal.
But then Wilhelm steps in.
But through Wilhelm's very deliberate revisions driven by public criticism, market demands, a desire to reach that wider middle-class audience, that raw archive was domesticated. It was polished, cleaned up, infused with the pious, patriarchal values of the Biedermeier era.
And then fast forward to the 20th century, companies like Disney globalize these already sanitized versions, codifying this simplified, maybe romanticized vision for generations.
Yes, creating the versions many of us know best.
But as we've seen, there's always more to the story underneath.
And the enduring power of these stories, I think, isn't really in a single static original version. It's in their capacity for perpetual reinvention, for reinterpretation. They continue to reflect the values, the anxieties, the interests of each new generation that encounters them, prompting us to ask, what do we seek in our own tales today?
This whole deep dive into the Grimm's fairy tales really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories, things that seem so familiar on the surface, hold such a complex and surprising history just beneath?
And maybe what does that tell us about our own changing values and how we choose to retell and remember the past, constantly shaping our cultural narratives as we go?
Well, thank you for seeking history with us today. We certainly hope you enjoyed this exploration.